wanted to welcome you all to our discussion today about the renaming of our clinic, the potential for renaming it. And before we get into that, though, I wanted to give some announcements, which are just basically announcements for the good of the group, so you know about these things that are happening. And the first one is that we're about to reach the month of October. I can't believe how we're speeding through these months, but October 15th is an important date. It is the National Latinx AIDS Awareness Day. And just to give you some data, there is about 1 out of every 6 Latinx persons living with HIV are unaware that they have it. And the whole aim of this day is to unite and mobilize the community to raise awareness and promote HIV testing and education. And that's on the 15th. Now, I haven't been able to find anything that's happening locally in terms of this day, but if I do find something, you know, I'll send out an email. And I also wanted to put this on everyone's radar that the Pacific Northwest Black Pride is going to be probably digital this year. They haven't really released the agenda yet, not that I could find, of what they're going to be doing, but it will be probably online due to COVID. If you are curious about Black Pride and finding out what's going on, you can always look at their website, which is nwblackpride.org. But I wanted to put that in your minds as well, that there's going to be another Pride event at the end of October here in Seattle. So those are the 2 quick announcements I had, but tonight we're going to talk about what's in a name. I'm going to go through some introductory slides, and then we're going to turn over the floor to Ellen, who's going to share the results of the survey that we've conducted. And then hopefully we'll have some good discussions about the topics that we've brought up tonight. So it should be a very quick sort of agenda for the evening. So again, I called this what's in a name, and I did that for one reason, and that's because I'm an English teacher at heart, and that came from Shakespeare, from Romeo and Juliet. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Juliet says that about Romeo and his name, and really saying, what does a name matter? Because the essence of the person is still the same. And in some senses, that might be true for us, but we're really looking at trying to get a name that reflects the essence of the University of Washington AIDS Clinical Trials Unit, while keeping the heritage of that name and yet adding to it. So these are just some of the thoughts that we have about any name change that we may adopt that should reflect these things: our commitment to science and to inclusion and diversity, as well as how we meet our community's needs. We want to make sure that we keep in mind our history, but we also want to include our expanded scope of work. So we were focused on HIV, and now we do research in hepatitis and other sexually transmitted infections, addictions, comorbidities experienced by people with HIV, and we even do COVID-19 treatments.
So we're multi-researching now.
Exactly. But we still want to make sure that we keep in mind the lived experiences of our community, of the people who are living with HIV. And we hope to reflect in any sort of name change the language that people use to tell their own stories about living with HIV. But why change AIDS? And this is really the focus of a lot of the thought behind the name change. Well, one of the reasons is that there are fewer diagnoses of AIDS. What was once a deadly disease has now become a chronic manageable condition. The name AIDS, or the word AIDS, can still carry a stigma in some communities, and even to some people who live with HIV. They feel stigmatized by that name. I know personally from when I used to work the front desk at the ACTU, some people felt that there was an embarrassment about the name AIDS, or having AIDS in the title of our clinic. And we want to make sure that any name change is sort of appropriately reflecting our collective evolution in transforming the pandemic into what it is today. Also, we are concerned that the word AIDS may actually deter some people from engaging with our research. And even when it comes down to just something like an internet search, HIV is a more popular phrase to look up on internet searches than AIDS is. It might also be coming down to a generational issue. So many people living with HIV in our area did not now live through the first devastating wave of AIDS. And so they might not sort of identify with the actual word AIDS. So I just picked up some quotes that some activists have said, and this is by Daniel Griffin, who's an HIV activist. He also has an MPH, and he talks about remembering being in the 8th grade for the first time. The first time he heard AIDS cross his mind, he was about 14. He tested positive after college at the age of 22, and he's now 33. And he says, I connect AIDS with wasting and losing dignity, and I didn't want to ever burden anyone like that. And another quote by Dr. Richard Walitsky. Now people with HIV can live just as long as their HIV negative peers. I've been living with HIV for more than 20 years, and I don't expect to ever develop AIDS. But why might we want to keep that word around? Well, there are definitely some people feel that by getting rid of it, we're just entrenching a divide and making it wider between the people who live with HIV and the people who have an AIDS diagnosis. And some people feel like getting rid of the word AIDS is trying to erase people with AIDS from history, trying to forget about that past that we've collectively lived through. And it also feels like by getting rid of it, some people feel like we're not honoring their experiences or the experience of people with AIDS. And so those are some of the reasons to keep it. And here's a quote to kind of go along with this. I have AIDS, and I will until there is a cure or I die. And I think that quote is really reflecting the fact that people can, once they get an AIDS diagnosis, that diagnosis sticks with them throughout the rest of their life. And so it doesn't matter if they get their T cells back up. Technically, once they've had an AIDS diagnosis, they always have it. So Anne is rejoining us. And so that was just showing a different side of the coin for some people. So I think Anne is rejoining us. And so to really get some people's thoughts and give people mostly a chance to take some time to think about it and write back to us, we created a survey. And the survey collected the responses. I sent it out via an email, and we also had it posted at our clinic with that QR code, which you see on the side there, which would take you to the survey. And I wanted to now take some time and let one of the other people involved with this take over. But before we get to that, just to keep in mind, we are planning to keep ACTU as a part of our legal name. So we're not going to be getting rid of that. We're looking for another broader title that will include the expanded scope of our work. So just keep that in mind. We're not getting rid of, but adding to. And so now I want to introduce Ellen. And Ellen, if you wanted to take the floor, you can introduce yourself more fully, and then just let me know when you want the slides to change.
All right, hi. My name is Ellen, as Michael said, and I feel very privileged to be invited to this meeting to talk to you guys a little bit. And I am a research coordinator for the ACTU. I've only been in the job for about 4 months, so I'm still relatively new. And I'm actually a biological anthropologist by training. So before starting with the ACTU, I was a lecturer for the Department of Anthropology at UW. And I was doing research that sort of sits at the intersection of like paleontology, anatomy and physiology, anthropology, and even Newtonian physics. I was really interested in a field called human evolutionary biomechanics. And for various different reasons, I've decided to shift out of academia. But because what I did in the past was so interdisciplinary, I've had a lot of experience with research involving human subjects, and I've been able to leverage that in my current position at ACTU. And I've had quite a fantastic time so far, learning an entirely different field. So that's sort of me and why I'm here. I think, so if we move on to the next slide. Yeah, nice. We put together this survey to sort of poll members of CAB and also the broader community to sort of figure out, like, what is it that you guys really need from a name change for us? We have a variety of reasons for pursuing this that Michael outlined. And we received in total actually 17 responses. We got another one just before the meeting started. And all of the responses involved really excellent, thoughtful suggestions about how we should go about our name change, and what we could potentially change it to, and the kinds of values and terms you'd all like to see represented in that. So I want to take a moment to thank everyone who did respond. We really appreciate not only your engagement, but your feedback on this issue. And it's important to us as a research unit to have your needs and history respected in this process. So again, thank you for taking the time to do this. Broadly, there is good support for changing the name of the ACTU based on the responses that we received. So about 75% of respondents more or less explicitly supported changing the name in some respect. Next slide, please. And so here we have a series of highlighted quotes that I think sort of really encapsulate some of the main ideas that you guys were putting forward about the name change. So this one is, this person is fine with the mention of HIV or HIV/AIDS, but AIDS by itself does create some stigma, especially outside of the LGBTQ community. But having HIV or AIDS is essential in the name, since it needs to be an identifiable sort of unit for the communities that we serve. And so it's a way of representing what we actually do with the unit is by keeping the HIV in the name. Here's another quote. It's a good idea to find an opportune moment to converge further away from the HIV/AIDS epidemic. A name that can broaden the scope of HIV/AIDS education seems to be timely to reach a broader scope of the community and of community involvement, as well as to further destigmatize the infected and those who are living with infections. Again, people living with HIV/AIDS need to know in the name what the function and the servings that are offered within the name itself. So what we actually do, it needs to be obvious to the community what we can provide. And this, I think, is a particularly excellent comment. So this was in the broader sort of context of including the idea of community in the name in some respect. And so community sounds like an invitation, a naming of a civic duty, offering a means to contribute to something greater than oneself. And I think that's a really important function of the way that participants engage with research in our unit. This person is suggesting that we keep HIV/AIDS, or at least research in the name in some respect. And they say, in general, I think this is an opportunity for UW and the ACTU to memorialize and honor activists who pushed ACTU to become what it is today, and acknowledges the impact that HIV/AIDS has had upon different communities historically. And so this is the counterpoint, I think, to the broader trend within the survey results, is that it really is important that we do keep our ties to our roots, so to speak, for many people. It would be great to change the name to reduce confusion within the research between the HIV Vaccines Trials Network and UW ACTU. Sorry, I'm still learning all the acronyms.
You got it though.
The UW ACTU or other HIV/AIDS clinical trials, clinics, and initiatives. All right. So we have some key terms and like trends that popped out when you were answering the first two questions about what you'd like to see represented in the name, should we change it. Of the 17 responses, about 10 or around 63, 64% expressed some desire or interest in retaining HIV, if not AIDS, as an integral part of the ACTU's name. So that's sort of like probably the most popular pick is keeping HIV as a prominent part of the unit's name, or at least substituting AIDS to put in HIV. Other values and terms that were consistently identified amongst respondents as being important to consider or to represent in our name change included things like community, research, health, and equity, all of which I think speak strongly to the ethos of the ACTU, as well as, the CAB members in general. There were also some additional terms and symbols that sort of like came up in the course of the responses as I was reading them. And there were things like caring, people, rainbow as sort of like as a symbol as it relates to its long and inclusive connection to like the LGBTQIA community and HIV positive community as well as wellness as a general value. Next slide, please. Yes. All right. So looking at the survey and the very thoughtful comments that were provided, I think there are some high-level takeaways that we need to consider carefully. The first is the continuing importance of representing or including HIV in our unit name, if not AIDS, because of, as we've highlighted and the responses have highlighted, the stigma more typically associated with AIDS. One respondent, I think, put it particularly eloquently, is that even if clinical trials are really exclusive to HIV/AIDS only, the psycholinguistic framing of that epidemic evokes certain images, particularly of, 1984 and Ronald Reagan, that most people would rather do without, especially when reflecting on whether you're the type of person to enroll in a clinical trial about the subject. And I thought that was really quite a neat summation of things. Another clear thread among the responses is a desire to shift our name away, a desire to more clearly emphasize community. So in the words of another respondent, actually it's the same respondent as before, that it's that community sounds like an invitation. We highlighted that quote a little while ago. So the naming of civic duty, etc. Additionally, there were a number of other suggestions about reframing the clinical trials part of our name in order to focus instead on research in a much more sort of broadly construed sense. So many people suggested in one way or another that focusing on clinical trials in our name could potentially have a negative connotation for prospective participants in our studies, which may ultimately play a role in alienating some people, with the implication that they're simply test subjects or lab rats and not whole people who are making an important contribution to developing HIV and HIV comorbidity interventions. All right. So there were also a couple of questions that arose out of the survey that I think we should take some time to try and address. So the first is, are we renaming CAB or the HIV clinic that is Madison Clinic? And the answer is no. We're only considering renaming the ACTU. That is the research unit associated with Madison. Next slide, please.
Yep.
And another important question is, are there limitations on what words that we can use in the new name? And this is quite frankly a little bit more of a complicated question, but still a really important one. Yes, there are in fact some limitations in terms of like how we can rename ourselves. And I think what I'll do is I'll turn this over to Dr. Bendo Ignacio to sort of talk about this a little bit more. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Good evening, everybody. And hello also from my daughter, who's in the background, and you may have seen. And hi, who says hello to everybody. Yeah, so I wanted to sort of put out some guardrails a little bit about this conversation, because what I also went through all of the responses to the questionnaires in detail and appreciated really the depth of thought and care that people put into this, and also some really innovative acronyms. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, so that we didn't have to sort of talk about like individual names that we could or couldn't choose, or just like kind of frame this conversation as maybe we start popcorning, or however, Michael, you think it's best to sort of put to community members to talk about names, is just sort of, as Ellen said, like, what are we renaming and what are some of the things that go along with it? So as Ellen said, Madison Clinic will still be Madison Clinic. I just wanted to also say, because I think people had various different associations with things, we are still a network site of the ACTG, or the AIDS Clinical Trials Group. that greater group, the big international group, some of you may be part of the GCAB of that as well. So this greater group will still be the AIDS clinical trials group, and we're not renaming them. We're just, and again, as Ellen pointed out, we are planning on keeping ACTU in the name, both to anchor the connection to history and, and honor AIDS and not erase AIDS, but also so that, for more practical reasons as well, so that we don't have to change contracts and things like that that have ACTU in the name. We're thinking about this as more of the, again, the outward sort of like branding and welcoming for people, while ACTU will still be part of the legal name, and still sort of, again, honor and link to that connection with the AIDS clinical trials group. So we will not stop doing those studies. Those studies will still be the focus of our work. And as Michael mentioned, as many of you know, we've taken on COVID work through that network. And there are also a lot of other cool projects that are happening within our unit. So for example, DoxyPEP. So that's not a study that's about HIV, but pertains to people living with HIV and other STIs. We'll be bringing on a new study soon about HIV-associated cancers, and hoping to do more of those, and potentially studies about substance abuse that pertain to both people living with HIV and people with risk factors for HIV. So again, just wanting to remind everyone that we are still going to be doing clinical trials, interventional research, but that's not our only thing that we're doing. Some people, I think, reacted strongly to the word trials, which we can definitely, again, as an option to take out of our local name, but we'll still be in the international linkage.
Kate had a question, Rachel.
Oh, yeah.
So
sorry, Kate, please go.
So are we like gonna, in the end, ACTU is gonna be, it's gonna be the broad name, and then there's gonna be whatever name comes up with for the name change linked underneath there. So if I go online and do a ACTU research or search, a Google search to try and find them, is it going to take me to the main server for all of the ACTU studies and researches and then drop down from there? How is this going to work?
Oh, so are you, when you're saying ACTU to the main server, are you referring to our local website for a unit, or to the AIDS clinical trials group, the big network page with all the different sites?
Actually for both. When you put it in, you come up with both of them when you do a Google search.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, so very important question. So AIDS clinical trials group, the big network of which we are a site, we are what's called a CRS, or clinical research site. As part of that big network, we will still be affiliated with them. We're not changing any of our affiliation or any of our work or any of the scope of the work that we're doing. So Google search will still bring you there. And then again, ACTU will probably be, we'll have to see how we want it to look aesthetically, and that can be a community decision as well too, but maybe like in parentheses, but also in all the links so that it's still in the Google search for the UW ACTU. So maybe it's helpful to sort of say UW before ACTU. So we're talking about ACTG, big network, UW ACTU, us local Seattle people doing our thing on 2 West in Harborview. So yeah, so those words will still stay in there so that, you know, any prior work, websites, attributions, all that stuff, you know, I know Michael will do a very careful job of making sure all of that links so that, you know, so that none of that is lost, for sure.
Yeah, because I'm sure we'll have a lot of people that hasn't been on the site for a while who may all of a sudden decide to go look for it, and then all of a sudden can't find it. Yeah,
no, absolutely. We are absolutely keeping that in mind, both for local media presence as well as, you know, again, links to the national. I also just wanted to touch on a few other words that some people mentioned. Some folks use the word institute, I think because I makes a nice, it's like nice in a bunch of the acronyms that people came up with that were really cool. Mm-hmm. Institute has a very specific connotation from like the UW perspective. An institute is like an independent-ish entity that would be like potentially its own building, and it wouldn't be like within a department or a clinic or something like that. And so wanting to make sure it's clear that the word institute, we're a unit. We don't have to have the word unit in our name, but functionally from like the university perspective, we're a unit, not an institute. So I can't, unfortunately, all those really cool acronyms, we can't say institute. what else do we want to talk about? The word care, I just wanted to talk about a little bit as well. I want to make sure that we are taught that because there's sometimes confusion about, again, sort of where people get their HIV primary care versus where people go for research, and Madison Clinic and the distinctions between the clinical side and the research side. And sometimes people get their treatment from us, but it's under the auspices of research. I want to make sure, like, I think we could use words like full of care or caring or imply care and that idea and feeling, but want to make sure very clearly that we don't use the words clinic, which implies, again, clinical care, like where somebody would go to see their primary care doctor, or care in the sense of like clinical care. So again, just making sure that this is, the word research doesn't have to be in the name, but it sounds like most people like having research in the name. But that we're sort of making sure that we're not causing confusion. Like, again, if people were looking up that they don't think we're a place to go get HIV primary care, that we're clearly a research entity. And then also just touching on community. I love that so many people are sort of like using research to call the community into the work. And I think that's so beautiful. And I think the word community could potentially appear in the name, but some of the names suggested talked about like community oriented research or community research. And I wanted to just talk about, in case some people aren't aware, there's a specific actual specialty, or what's the word that I'm looking for, a discipline of research called community-based participatory research, or community-oriented research, which is sort of by definition not like clinical research, interventional clinical trials and type things, and the things that we do, meaning that somebody would like go out into the community and ask the community, like, what could we change for like community engagement? And that would be the research, as opposed to having community involvement and community engagement into clinical trials. And so I just wanted to kind of put those things in mind as we start spitballing, because I want to sort of take some of those wonderful, beautiful nuggets of what people came up with and make sure that they're not misleading or not misrepresenting ourselves or what we are, such that, again, as you said, Kate, people both know who we were and who we are, and that we're still the same place and that we haven't changed. We're just trying to become more welcoming. And number two, that if somebody was new to Seattle and wanted to know where they could get HIV care, or was interested in community-based participatory research, which is a discipline, that we weren't misrepresenting the type of work that goes on here. So I think that there's ways to use a lot of these words that call our work in without, I don't know if I'm making that clear, or like, but please let's discuss.
Yes.
I just wanted, those were things that came up to me in terms of starting points before this conversation, just from like the technical conversation. If anybody else has questions about research that we're doing now that we didn't do before, or anything that's different as you now see a new director, this is not a huge shift in what we're doing. It just, as Michael and Ellen both said, this is mostly just about image and being welcoming to people.
And so with that, let's open up the floor. Now, Kate, do you have your hand raised from before, from your first question, or is this another question?
Before, sorry, I didn't take
No
it.
worries, no worries. I always forget to lower my hand. So it's okay. But I wanted to open it up to all of you to give a chance to respond to what you've heard, seen, presented so far. What are the thoughts in your head?
Well, I think that I understand rebranding to a point, but I think they need to keep the umbrella there for sure. But I agree with the fact of attracting more people by not making it only an AIDS issue. However, I agree that you still have to have AIDS part of it. Personally, I have an AIDS diagnosis, even though big class how it is. And like you said, that's not something that goes away.
Right.
I prefer causes fear, especially in society. Can be a challenge on the cover.
You were breaking up a little bit there towards the end, Starlet. I couldn't hear the last comment.
I think it's going to be quite a challenge try to combine all of it in there, but yeah, definitely give it some thought.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
definitely
agree.
do that. They need something fresh to refresh the system.
Yeah.
Why don't you keep it simple? Science-based research for HIV and more.
Mhm.
Simple. Doesn't cover everything.
Does that have a cool acronym?
Huh?
Can we make a cool acronym out of that?
I don't know. Can you make a cool acronym out of that? Science-based research, HIV and more.
Mm,
Not really.
No.
HIV and more. Yeah.
I guess it's simple, stupid.
It seems like to me like one of the more simple options, I think, would be just to add the HIV in front, like have an HIV/AIDS clinical trials unit. So it would be, the acronym would be HACTU, which is probably not great.
Well, and one of the things that I did hear in the survey is that people might want to take the word trials out. Somebody actually said we've never done trials, and part of this sort of, again, modernization is understanding that some people, especially communities of color, associate the word trials with the judicial system, with law enforcement, of like being part in a trial. And so a lot of people talk about participating in research, and this was probably somebody who had participated in research many times but says, I've never been in a trial. And so again, it will always be the AIDS clinical trials group, the big international group, but this could be an opportunity to take that word out as well.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, Rachel, because I've heard that many times, the connotation of the word trial meaning something that's not research related. I don't even think people understood clinical, what the clinical part meant, you know, like, and then what a clinical trial was versus the other types of research. But we shouldn't expect them to know these little minute details of what we do for a living. We should have something that's more broadly appealing, that, you know, doesn't need to be sold, you know, that they get the gist of it. I like going to a more broader term of just calling it research. We do research, because that's how I usually, when I go out into the community, I talk about research studies. I don't talk about clinical trials that we're offering. I talk about research studies, and, you know, that might not be the technically correct term, but it's the term that everyone understands. Brandon.
Yeah, so I'm very much with y'all on the like research versus trials. I feel like clinical trials is just, whenever I did recruiting with the HIV vaccine trials unit, a few of the things that I experienced there were people like having a little bit of hesitancy about when I would talk about clinical trials versus research. And also, to what extent is it important for ACTU and HBTU to be distinguished from one another among people in the community who are not familiar with the work that we do?
Exactly. And I personally don't feel that since we are one CTU, as they call it, we are one clinical trials unit. In other words, the vaccine trials unit is a site and we are a site, but we are part of the same funding mechanism. We're funded together, so we are together in that sense.
So do you like share databases? Like if recruiters were to be out with both units and collecting information from the community, could the recruiters like bring the information back to a shared database, and each of you collects data or collect potential participants from a shared repository?
They're actually explicitly forbidden from doing that.
Yes.
Because of the fact that the way the VTU the vaccine unit recruits people, they use all sorts of direct to community recruiting, that if they were to find out that somebody was positive, they're not allowed to transmit that information to us because it's considered to be high risk, potential for disclosure.
Okay.
So it seems like a very logical thing, but apparently they sort of have like, they have our business card, so to speak, and then can, if somebody calls in and says, actually, can I participate in a study? And then they say, oh, I happen to be positive. They say, great, here's the phone number. Why don't you text these folks or give them a call? But they're not allowed to actually send us that information directly, just for risk of disclosure. It's a good question though, Brandon.
Still considered very highly confidentiality.
Exactly. Because people call in off of radio ads and all sorts of other things. Like, it's a different mechanism than how we recruit people, mainly from their primary care providers, or or see our information directly through clinical.
So I think the question may still be there then about trials unit being part of the name. Does it make a difference? I mean, both of these units are trials units. Like, that is
Right.
functionally what both of them are. But for people who are not familiar with the work, it may be difficult to sort the two of them just because they are both called trials unit. Does that make a difference?
Yeah, we're under no obligation to keep any of that in our name at all. For example, so Michael, what were you telling me? The group at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical is called Research with a Heart.
Yep.
And so it's a little bit confusing the way these like clinical research sites or CRSs work, but we happen to be only part of one network. But some sites, so for example, the New Jersey site is both HIV Prevention Trials Network, I think HVTN, and also ACTG, and they do other things like that. And so they are called Research with a Heart, and that's just the name of the unit, but then they're still an affiliate with all these trials, and they do trials for both people at risk for HIV and who are living with HIV. So again, we're under no obligation to keep that in the name, other than, again, just as Kate was emphasizing, that ACTU will probably stay there in parentheses or in some way to link it historically and in Google searches.
And just to point out to everyone, Ellen is typing some of the suggested names that we had into the chat, so you can see some of the ideas that have come up. And I started off with a few of them as well. Positive research or positive wellness research, which I like that a lot. I love it. It's not saying HIV, but it has the positive part there, but I like how it's positive wellness, and that can be taken many different ways. Since we're working on that, you can see it has a clinic in it, right? So any other thoughts that anyone wanted to share?
Yeah, quite a few of the names, sorry, have clinic in them. And so I'm sharing those, but it's with the caveat that we know that we can't really use the word clinic to describe what we do, but it's like I think some of these are nice starting points for trying to like re-envision what this could look like.
Exactly.
I've been doing research off and on for 30 years, and I've always had them come at me with a research study. We have a research study. And the science behind this has brought us to come to this point to where now we open this study. So it's always been explained to me in terms of it's a research study, but it's based off of science and studies from other areas or other states that now we want to conduct our own. So I'm thinking research and science somehow need to be linked together or some way refer to that, because what you're doing is science, but you're also doing research. So, I mean, I don't know how to incorporate all that into the words, but
right.
Are you getting what I'm saying, Michael?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Do you think, Kate, do you think that using research would kind of imply science? Do you think that it would be okay without the science part? Like instead of saying science and research, do you think if we were just saying, like, look at some of these examples here, like they were saying the Center for Health Connections and Research. Do you think that would imply science behind that to you?
Most people, when they're looking at health wise, that's been HIV positive or in and out of research studies, they refer that research as to the science-based part of it. So yeah,
Right.
I agree.
I would.
I would
Charlie?
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone
Cool.
else?
How about Larry or Manuel? What are you thinking about all of this? Oh, Manuel just typed. I'm trying to think of acronyms.
Oh my God, hair.
Hair.
That's hilarious.
Hair.
I love it.
I don't.
Sorry, Michael. It's
That's
not
okay.
inclusive, I guess.
Yeah,
Just-
that reminds me of the movies from back in the 80s.
Although my favorite musical, so we can just use that. Yeah, and then I also just wanted to let everyone know, like, don't really think that we're trying to come up with the answer now. It's really just exploring the problem further and giving people a chance to add their 2 cents, and so we can hear your voices. It's not about like coming up with a solution right at the end of this meeting that we have to pick a name that we're going to be going with at the end of this. It's still going to have, a lot more steps, I think, and a lot more input from people in various ways before we come up with a name that really seems to work.
Is there an app you can put all these names or these like research community and everything else that people put on your survey into an app and come up with wording to where it give you different increments that you can work with?
I don't know if there's an app, but we definitely can play around with that, and I can take a look. I know there are sort of word letter scramblers and like acronym makers, where you could put your name in and then it would break your name up and make it into another sort of another word that it could pull out from the letters of your name. But I don't know if they have something that we would specifically be able to use for this. But again, it'll be taking some exploration online for that. That's a good suggestion though, Kate. Thank you.
I like the positive wellness research. And as far as acronyms go, that kind of leans toward power. So I think there's probably plenty that could be done with like empowerment, and putting positive wellness research, PWR, like into that.
We don't have to have an amazing acronym. It could be acronym free as long as it's not, a sentence.
Right. Right. And there is a group in Texas led by Nelson Virgil that I think uses that power. I have to look and see what he is. I'd have to check. I wouldn't want to steal someone else's fire there. UW HIV Research Unit. Personally, one of the things I feel is like we are doing other research that doesn't always need someone to have HIV or live with HIV. The COVID research is the best example, but we also do hepatitis studies where they can have HIV or not have HIV. And I know it's kind of off-putting sometimes when I have to explain to people that, yes, we are the AIDS clinical trials unit, but we're doing this other research as well. It'd be nice to have a name where you wouldn't have to do any explaining of that sort of stuff, that we could have something that would be like, again, like just taking positive wellness, that doesn't matter if you had COVID or if you had hepatitis or if you had HIV, you could still see yourself underneath that umbrella. Having HIV or AIDS specific, just sometimes it's like, oh, well, how do you advertise that to people who have hepatitis? And that's what the focus of the research would be for that specific study. So it's just something to think about.
What about something like UW Rainbow Research Unit? Maybe that's a little bit silly.
Yeah. I do think one of the things that we're probably going to do is take some of these ideas and we'll probably test run them again with a different survey to give people a chance to look at various examples that we've come up with and rate them, and maybe then also add their own that it might be inspiring them. I think it's going to be a process of chewing the fat, so to speak, and putting things down and letting it sit and seeing which ones actually fit the needs that we've described to you all. I think that's really what we're going to have to do that.
Well, when the word wellness comes up, I think of going to an actual doctor to take care of my body, to take care of myself emotionally, physically, mentally, whatever.
Right.
I'm taking care of my wellness of myself through,
Right.
through the clinic.
But what if it was wellness research?
See, that would work. But it would be more, I'd look at it, if I wasn't aware what I was looking for online,
Right.
without doing further research into it, I would think it's more of a wellness research. It's to keep people healthy from this point on, not for a specific type of thing. So,
Cool.
but that's the way I think, and I don't know how many other people out there think like me. That kind of scary.
So, can I ask you a further question about that? So I think, I feel both ways about it, where I just like you said, I want to make sure that we're not thinking that this is like a wellness clinic, but I do like the idea that, I think part of what I was talking about with, not only the diversity of people, but the diversity of research is that, sorry, my smaller cat just came home, my human cat, that a lot of the research that we're doing now is to keep people living with HIV well, and not just in treating the HIV itself, but like you said, sort of preventing further problems with cancer, with metabolic problems, with other infections. And so, yeah, I kind of wanted to dig into that and exactly like you said, sort of make sure that it signals research with wellness and isn't confusing for like, this is my new primary care doctor. Which one were you leaning towards? Were you worried that it was confusing, or with the word research in it, is it clear enough?
With research in it, it would be clear, but at the same time, you're gonna have, in any name you pick, you're gonna have people out there that are gonna confuse the definition of the name regardless. I'm just wondering if you're gonna have more people out there with wellness research or even wellness in the name, thinking it's more of a physical doctor or somebody for mental health, or without including HIV or other viruses, other variations like COVID, cancer, stuff like that. But in any, like I said, in any name you pick, there's going to be some sort of confusion from somebody out there.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I just wanted to pull this up and share it with you all because Manuel put it into the chat there. He pointed out this group, they're called TASK. I don't know what TASK stands for. I can't tell, but this is the way they do clinical trials. They do clinical research, good clinical practice, laboratory design. Do you know can you tell us more about this group, Manuel? Do you know, or anything?
I think it says up above, sort of like what the first three letters of TASK stand for. Wait, hang on.
Yeah, because I clicked on this, but it just brought me back to this page. Whoops. Well,
if you go back to the page you were on, Michael, and scroll down, it tells you right there what they are.
Right here. That's what I was saying. But I don't know what TASK stands for, if it stands for anything.
It might not.
It might not. Yeah, it might just be the name, right?
Yeah.
But this is the CTU, right, Manuel, in the sense that, like, as we're talking about our organization within Seattle, the greater organization that we belong to with our sister clinic, the Seattle Vaccine Trials Unit, this is like their equivalent for, this is multiple clinics that do research, but they're affiliated with us in the global sense.
Yeah.
This is the Stellenbosch CTU. So this is like our relative organization in Cape Town.
Yep. So that's interesting. I'll have to look more on the site here. I just wanted to share it with you all since he put it into the chat there. Something to look at. Yeah, and it's sort of like what my friend Christy Costanza and her group over at Rutgers did with just calling their research unit Research with a Heart. It seems like not a name for a place, but it does work because they thought the biggest thing they wanted to communicate to any of their participants, whether they were positive or negative, because they do ACTG trials, they do HVTN, they do HPTN trials, they do lots of trials. They just wanted it to be like that it was coming from the heart, that people were doing it for altruistic reasons. And so they wanted to emphasize that heart, like doing it with love. Both the people who work there and the people who are volunteering with their studies were motivated by love. And they just felt like emphasizing that, which I just love. And I love how they've just taken off with that idea.
Can I ask you something, Michael?
Sure.
What do people that you work with seem to think about the change in the name?
It's a good question. We have a few of them here online with us. I don't know if they want to share. Chris or Ellen or Mustafa, do you want to share anything? Anne? I don't know if Anne got her microphone back.
Is my mic on now?
Oh, yes, it is. Yay.
Okay, there's nothing like turning things off and turning back on. It was quite frustrating to have to wait. So I think it's a great idea because I believe that what the ACTU stands for is pretty dated. And I actually think it's too bad that the AIDS Clinical Trials Group doesn't want to have a new name. And I don't know if that is at all being discussed, because if it was being discussed, then it might actually lead to something for us. But so I think it's past time to have a new name, and I think it's a great idea.
Awesome.
But I have to say I don't have any good ideas. Other than that we do infectious disease research, but
Did we lose her?
no, I just stopped.
I also think the same way. I think the name AIDS Clinical Trials Unit doesn't resonate with a lot of people currently, or maybe stands in the way of people participating in research. I do like the name that was one of the names that was suggested was Positive Research, but I also think given the responses on the survey, having HIV still in the name would be important to a lot of people, and important that even though the ACTU is working on other types of research, its main core is HIV positive research. So something along the lines of HIV positive research, which is not creative at all. But yeah, that's my.
Yeah, it's gonna take a little bit more of a marketing perspective, I think, to take these ideas and meld them into something that's workable, because right now we're just taking these concepts, but we're not thinking maybe of other words that even suggest positive or wellness or research. You know, like task sounds like a group of people that do a lot of work, doesn't it? Like, so, and that obviously when you look at their website, you get the idea of what their work is. But, you know, I think that's where the creativity comes in here. It's a more of a marketing idea than it is just a simple choosing words and putting them together in a string and hoping they make some sort of word. Although I do like power.
You also want a title to where people are going to take a second and look at your site too, like task. If I'm looking at on a medical, I put something in versus medical, I'm looking for something up on medical and task pops up, it's going to grasp my curiosity to kind of click on it and look and see what they do, because task has nothing to do with the medical field or research.
Right.
So
at least not evidently.
Yeah. So at the same time, I think even though you want to keep with research and positive or wellness, and people want to keep HIV in it, I think you also need something there that's going to make people curious to what are you doing? What's it all about? Without bypassing it and saying, oh, HIV research, go right past it.
Right.
So.
I wonder if I don't know if a lot of people find the word pause as in POZ, empowering or not. or POS. But I think it's a very empowering word for a lot of people, and if it resonates with a wide audience, regardless, I know there's a magazine called Pause, but just like having the word pause versus positive also might make it more empowering. That's just
Yeah, I think it
don't know what you
depends on
think.
where people are with their journey with HIV. If they're living with the virus, some people are empowered by it, but there are plenty of people who any reference to HIV or AIDS is they just don't want to think about it. But those are also maybe likely the people that might not want to get involved with research anyway. But I have many friends who live with HIV, and they've known me for 20 some years, and never once have they ever even come to a CAB meeting, no matter how many times I try to bring it up to them. And it's all because they're being reminded that they have the virus, and they don't like being reminded about that. So there's definitely going to be a group of people who are empowered by pause, but there's just as likely a lot of people who won't be.
Yeah. Well,
But
that's
isn't
also
it in any name, Michael?
What?
Isn't that going to be in any name you pick? Where you're going to have people that are inspired by it and people that aren't?
Yes, true. But like, again, I was looking at it more from the angle of not trying to necessarily inspire so much as just be something that's more accurate in terms of the scope of work that we do. So if we have to create materials for a hepatitis study, we're not putting there that it's the AIDS clinical trials unit doing hepatitis research and then having to do a lot of explaining, or the COVID research. I just know that there were lots of people when they saw some of the things, they're like, why is this being done at the AIDS clinical trials unit? The HVTN is also doing COVID vaccine, but they got to recreate their entire network and create a COVID PN, and that helps separate, even though it's the same people doing both jobs, it helps separate, at least in the public face. That's COVID vaccine research, and this is HIV vaccine research. You know what I mean? So that they've covered it that way. We're not going to be able to do that. We can't become the COVID trials unit as well as the AIDS clinical trials unit. So trying to think that's where I'm looking at the name personally. Not that means that's where we're going to end up on, but that's what I'm hoping that, where something like positive can mean HIV positive, but it could just be positive wellness. And it may not be like, for someone who doesn't live with HIV, they might not be seeing HIV in that at all. And it may not be off-putting to them,
Yeah.
So that the positive, that's why I was interested in positive, because it seemed to be more welcoming than the HIV specific without getting rid of HIV. It just becomes more of a connotation of positive, as opposed to directly saying it. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I'm listening to people talk and what's important to them, and hearing about the sort of community and the sort of impact part, I'm almost wondering that if a way to sort of say that is if positive, instead of it being positive almost becoming a adjective in the sense of if you say positive wellness or something like positive impact research, then that's honoring that the work that participants are putting in by participating in this research, by coming in, that you yourself are making a positive impact. Yes. And nobody had used the word impact, I don't think, but so impact is the pediatric HIV AIDS clinical trials network, but with two A's. So I think we're safe if we use just the standard spelling of the word, but I don't know, does that resonate with anybody? I just wanted to hear.
I like it.
Positive impact research,
yes.
Sort of inviting you to come in and make a positive impact.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't exclude just HIV people or anybody else. It's a broad, it'll cover everybody without having one or the other in it. And when HIV people are looking for it, they see the positive, which most people nowadays, they refer to themselves as positive anyways.
Right.
Right. Well, I like it because it's not specific. I mean, the AIDS, HIV, it's so much broader than that because it, I mean, the COVID is a great example, but it's not the only example that exists. And therefore, I think that's where that's why I said infectious diseases, but it's even broader than that because cancer's not always infectious. It can be, but it doesn't. So I think that Rachel's idea about positive impact makes a lot of sense.
And I'd like positive impact as well, because it fits with one of the things I used to hear at the front desk all the time, which was people who were involved in our trials. I once created the lemon, if you remember, Anne, the lemon cards.
Yeah, lemon and lemonade.
Because people said, like, the reason that they were getting involved in research was, well, they were dealt this poor hand, but this was something good that they could make of it. They felt like they were doing something good with their diagnosis. They felt like they were somehow giving back and going to help the future. And so that positive impact fits in with that idea very nicely, I think, in terms of the motivation of a lot of the people who got involved in our studies.
I wonder, like, I know it's not going to be the working name, but I'm thinking of confusion between positive impact and then the impact network, which is the international maternal and pediatric adolescent.
Although the impact acronym is a pretty, it's pretty tortured, but
yeah.
And it is a different impact. It's not the same, as Rachel mentioned.
Yeah. And I think furthermore, we don't have an impact site in Seattle. And so I don't know that there's going to be local confusion or concern about it. And like my guess is that the majority of adults looking to participate in research won't have even heard of impact unless they're like well-seasoned CAB members who go to GCAB things and hear about the other networks.
Right.
I don't know. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say that most people don't know unless they've been involved with our research and have heard it through that. And there was a time when we used to have impact sharing our CAB. So, but I think those days are long gone. And unless they're savvy about HIV research, they're not going to think of impact at all. You know, especially because we're not spelling it with 2 A's. Okay, did anyone have any final thoughts they wanted to bring up or ideas or? No? Well, I think we've had a good discussion tonight. I think we could probably end it right here because, again, we're not going to be solving this in one fell swoop, but I do think that you've all given us a lot of input, those who filled out the survey, as well as those of you who shared your voice with us tonight. And so I wanted to thank each and every one of you for joining us. Ellen, I wanted to thank you for your marvelous summation and for your help with the survey. It was beautifully done. And I think the results were the result of the work that you put into it to begin with. So thank you for that work. I wanted to say that to everyone. I just wanted to remind you all that we will have a CAB meeting next month as well. We're going to be returning back to HIV cure and specifically having a conversation again about treatment interruptions, including talking to a community member who's gone through a treatment interruption. So we're going to hear their story and we're going to find out and be able to ask questions of them and what they went through and what it was like and what their concerns were, how it was, and just to sort of get a pulse in our own community where we are at with the idea of going on a treatment interruption. So that'll be on October 26th. And that'll be again on a Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. here, or if you're in another time zone, we're at Pacific here, so 5:30 Pacific, it'll be 8:30 Eastern. And if you're in Arkansas, I guess that makes it 7:30, right?
Yeah, it started at 7:30.
Cool. So, but I wanted to honor your time, and we're at our usual quitting time. So if there's no further comments, I wanted to say thank you again and wish you all a good evening. Have a pleasant rest of your night. All right. Thanks a lot. And
Thanks, Michael. Be well.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.